Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Mighty Maccabees. It has been a while, y'all. I gotta be completely straightforward about that. I wanted to get to this series finished back in December, but it's not exactly possible. Tonight's episode is called Volunteer to Die, because we're about to take a turn in the story that is so cataclysmic. It is going to lead to the greatest atrocities that are written about in most people's extra biblical texts. Today, I'm going to be reading from the Et Sefer, because most Bibles threw these books out of them a long time ago. And obviously, there may or may not be some good reasons for that, textual issues that may have come up over time. But these were books that were regarded as valuable and as teachable materials for thousands of years. And I think, honestly, one of the main reasons we don't see these texts in our main Bibles is because of the stories that you're about to read about next. You're going to hear some of the things that have happened to human beings that are so egregious, that are so abysmal, people don't even feel comfortable reading them out loud, let alone ever hearing other people talk about them. And I have some skin in the game when it comes to stories like that, because for much of my life, I was denied the opportunity to share a story of my life, the opportunity to witness what I'd been through, the opportunity to talk about what I've seen and heard and smelled and tasted at different times and in different seasons of my life. And so when people came along and tried to systemically rip those chapters out of my life, I had some frustration, I had some anger, I had some rage, and that rage led me into and to be a part of things that were abominable. So before we go any further, I'm going to give a small cautionary warning. Tonight's topic and the nature of the text that we are reading is definitely not PG. I do my best to keep most of the content on our channel here PG-ish. You know what I mean? That's just a phrase. I guess it should be basically about what you can read in the Bible. But most people don't read a lot of the kinds of verses like I'm about to talk about here, because they are so horrible. But you know what? Ezekiel chapter 8, Ezekiel chapter 9. There's some chapters in the Bible that as you're reading along, some letters that are written to the people that are so impossibly bad. Most people don't want to talk about it. But tonight, I think it's a good idea to live dangerously and talk about these things. So if you have some young ears in the room who you've not actually talked to about the realities of the world, you should consider finding ways to talk about what's in the scripture now, rather than letting the dragon, the enemy, the devil, that serpent of old, indoctrinate your children through his system of evil in his own ways. So I'm going to do my best to try to be intentional about what I talk about tonight, but I'm also just going to read simply for you. So shall we begin? Let's do it. We are in 2 Maccabees, chapter 6. Now, real quick, when we left off in the story, Judah Maccabee, Yehuda Maccabee, with 9 others, or thereabout, withdrew himself into the wilderness and lived in the mountains after the manner of beasts with his company, who fed on herbs continually, lest they should be partakers of the pollution. If you don't remember in our story, y'all, there was basically Israel, right? Divided into 2 houses. House of Israel, house of Judah, maybe Benjamin. They're the ones living in Jerusalem. And then the house of Israel is scattered abroad, more or less, all over the place. Jerusalem is the center point of a lot of the story, or Judah, the tribe of Judah's territory. That's where the center point of a lot of the story is that we're talking about. There's these rulers that have come in to the land of Israel and to the land of Judah and have begun to oppress the people and try to draw them into a way of living that is contrary, astray, satanic. That's what satanic really means, like go astray. It's a satanic way of living that would cause them to incur the curse, the wrath of Yahweh would be upon them. And by doing so, those people are able to rule over and have dominion over the people of Israel, that they would not have the ability to rule over any other way. So Yehuda Maccabee is literally just risen up in the story. He's just taken a stand to be set apart against it. And so he flees into the wilderness and he's eating herbs of the field. We're going to do a whole series on foraging.
Little spikenard.
Here, you want to?
Like pine. Oh,
Look.
like pan.
Oh, they're so good.
Foraging, because you need to forage. Do you know why you need to forage? Because you're commanded to. Genesis 3. Oh, let's do this. You ready? Right after the serpent, the dragon, gets the satanic agenda started, getting men to go astray, Yahweh gives man an opportunity to contend against the curse. And you know what he does? Here's what he says. And unto Adam he said, because you have hearkened unto the voice of your woman, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In sorrow shall you eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns also, and thistles shall it bring forth to you, and you shall eat at the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face shall you eat bread, till you return unto the ground, for out of it you were taken. For dust you are, and unto dust you shall return. He literally gives clear instructions here that we're supposed to eat the herbs of the field. Most of us don't eat the herbs of the field. Second contention, most of us don't work by the sweat of our faces in order to eat bread. I was definitely in that camp for almost my entire life. I tried to sign up for jobs that did not require me to escape out of climate-controlled environments. I didn't want to have to work in the hot, sweaty, brutal, physical labor jobs for so many years of my life, until the Father literally dragged me. No, didn't drag. He gave me the opportunity to choose a life of continued blood, sweat, and tears and misery, or sweat of my face and delicious bread. That's what he gave me. I now am a volunteer on farms. That's what I do, full-time, 50 hours a week. I volunteer on people's farms. I labor in the fields. I drip my sweat of the earth, my blood, into the earth in order for my family to be able to eat bread and to give me an opportunity to live in places where I can minister the word wherever the Father might give me an opportunity to do so. That's what I do, full-time now. And it's life. And if we would flee to the wilderness when the Father calls us to, even if we had to eat the herbs of the field, we would be given life. And it would give us the opportunity to contend against the dragon of old. Okay? That's what Yehuda Maccabee and his companions are on a quest now to do. So let's pick up. Not long after this, the king sent an old man of Athens to compel the Yahudim, Jews, to depart from the Torah of their fathers, and not to live after the Torah of Elohim, and to pollute also the temple in Yerushalayim, and to call it the temple of Jupiter, Olympius, and that in Gerizim of Jupiter, the defender of strangers, as they did the desire that dwelt in that place. The coming in of this mischief was sore and grievous to the people, for the temple was filled with riots and reveling by the other people, Goyim, who dallied with harlots and had to do with women within the circuit of the holy places, and besides that brought in things that were against the Torah. The altar also was filled with profane things which the Torah forbids. Neither was it lawful for a man to guard days of Shabbat or ancient feasts, or to profess himself at all to be a Yahudi. And in the days of the king's birth. Hold on. If you haven't seen this before in your life, it's because you haven't read your history books. This is the same agenda that takes place cyclically, because prophecy is something that happens in a nice, beautiful circuit. It's unavoidable, it's inescapable, until the Father would choose to allow his people. No, until we ourselves would make the choice to regard our Father's instructions and listen and obey him and honor and walk in his ways, we will continue to repeat these same cycles that you see here and suffer the curses that come with it. When this old man of Athens, which by the way is a Greek, right? There's a Greek man comes in and brings about a change, a satanic agenda that authorizes within the people a great and horrible curse. And they specifically target, if you notice, the instructions of the Father, the Torah, right? And the temple, okay? So the loving instructions of the Father, that would be Genesis to Revelation. That's what you get here. Okay? And then your temple. Back then and present day, but really, back then the temple was a physical location, place on the earth, yeah? Jerusalem. The center, the apple of his eyes on that city, on that spot. Still is. Always will be. The apple of his eye was there. His covenant, his throne, his physical throne on this earth was there, right? The people polluted that place. They brought into that house, that house of Elohim, they brought into it polluted things, evil things, detestable things. They engaged in whoredom in that place. They ate of defiled foods, and they were specifically walking in a way that was perverse, all within the temple. Modern day temples, y'all, are our bodies. If you didn't know that, it's because you got to read towards the end of this story. Your body is the modern temple that is supposed to be a tabernacle, a place that's set apart to receive the Spirit of Yahweh. The enemy's agenda is still the same. Get people to perverse the incorruptible way of the Torah, the loving instructions of the Father. Get them to transgress their instructions from their Father, and get them to bring perverse things into themselves so that they can incur the curse of Yahweh. I'll go on. Now, and in the day of the king's birth, every month they were brought by bitter constraint to eat of the sacrifices. And when the feast of Bacchus was kept, the Yahudim were compelled to go in, coerced, okay, to go in procession to Bacchus, carrying ivy. Moreover, there went out a decree to the neighbor cities of the heathen by the suggestion of Ptolemy against the Yahudim, that they should observe the same fashions and be partakers of their sacrifices. And whoso would not conform themselves to the manner of the other people should be put to death. Then might a man have seen the present misery. Basically, here's how it goes. If you don't conform to the system of our holidays, our ways of worshiping our gods, then you are going to be persecuted unto death. That's kind of how the system breaks down. But it's not necessarily all the way unto death. A lot of it is just the death of your finances, your relationship, and the place where you may dwell. You'll see how they kind of systemically rip away people's creature comforts until they can get them to conform. Because that's what you'll see here, is that they're being constrained. Like, think of a serpent. Guys, most serpents don't kill prey with venom. Most serpents are not venomous. I had a deep, incredible fear of snakes for many years of my life when I was young because of things I'd witnessed that caused me to see serpents as they are, as the cursed version that we see in the garden, right? I saw that version represented before me, so I had a deep fear of snakes for many years of my life until I bought a snake that I moved into the room that I was living in. Because I knew if I had this as an animal, as a pet, I would have to take care of it and nurture it in order for it to live. And it got me gradually desensitized to being afraid of it. And it got me to a place where I was comfortable with it. To where just the other day, I literally touched a snake that was in the wild. It was marvelously intense. I still get an intense rush from touching snakes. But it taught me discipline to not fear the animal. The snakes, though, when you feed them like a mouse or something else, I had a constrictor. And the way they kill is that they launch their heads onto something, and they have rows of teeth, kind of big, sharper fangs towards the front, and lots of little, like, tiny, smaller teeth in the back. And what they do is they bite onto their prey, and they hold onto it with their teeth. They don't inject venom and toxins into it. Constrictors then throw coils of their muscular body around their prey so that as it's immobilized, like in a snare basically, in the snare of the mouth of the serpent, then it throws coils over it again and again and again. And then what those coils do is as that animal fights, it stimulates the serpent to constrict more. Every time the prey animal tries to breathe and actually take in a breath, when it lets up that breath, when it takes in a big breath and then lets it out, the snake squeezes harder. And then when it breathes in again and it lets it out, it squeezes harder. And then it does it again and again and again until the pressure on that animal, on those lungs, is so tight that there no longer can it take a breath in, and it suffocates. So it predominantly kills its prey by suffocating it to death. And that method is the main way most snakes actually kill their prey. Some of them, granted, have the ability to inject venom and cause toxic reactions inside the body in order to kill the prey, cause it to bleed out, cause it to hemorrhage, and just, or other times they kind of paralyze them and cause them their lungs to stop being able to breathe, or take in air, or their heart to stop beating. So there's different ways that snakes kill things, but constriction is what you see that forces the Yahudim to be conformed into this version of what they're going through. And you see, this is how the enemy still to this day constricts himself around us. He's built a society through the governing forces of the world, right? If you see the seat of Hasatan in the scripture, it's predominantly in the governments. Not just Hollywood, y'all. I know, and religious systems, but it's predominantly the government. You know, read the book of Acts. It's all over there. Anyways, I'll go on. Verse 10, for there were 2 women brought who had circumcised their children, whom when they had openly led them about the city, the babies hanging at their breasts, they cast them down headlong from the wall. And others that had run together into caves nearby to guard the Sabbath secretly, being discovered by Philip, were burnt alive together, because they made a conscious choice to help themselves for the honor of the most sacred day. So women who had sacrificed their creature comforts known as their life, they volunteered to die by circumcising their sons. If you circumcised your son, you'd be executed. If you kept the Shabbat, you'd be executed. Basically, the same thing happened, y'all, after, this fella character came into the Christian ideology known as Constantine, and folks after him that set up the great whoredom known as modern Catholicism, Christianity, this eclectic blending of religions that we've seen out there, that watered down version of what people think is biblical living. When he brought that system in, what they really did, y'all, is make it illegal for people to worship on Shabbat, keep the festivals, and walk in the covenant of Yahweh. And they made them participate in these pagan holidays where they worshiped gods like Jupiter, like on his birthday, December 25th, or on, Ishtar's resurrection day for Tammuz, where they would mark their foreheads with the ashes of the dead animals, and then they would dip their children in the blood. They would dip eggs in the blood of their children that they'd sacrificed from engaging in these rituals. This is the history of the traditions that we've inherited that have become our modern holidays, right? This stuff started a long time ago, you guys, and the same version is just repeated again and again and again. The same thing happens to this day. Blood of martyrs scatters itself all over the face of the earth because the serpent hunts these people consistently, even though we don't tend to witness this with our eyes in America generally. But perhaps that could be changing. We'll see. Now, I beseech those that read this Sefer that they would be not discouraged for these calamities, but that they judge those punishments not to be for destruction, but for a chastening of our nation. For it is a sign of his great goodness, when wicked doers are not suffered any long time, but forthwith punished. For not as with other nations, whom Yahuwah patiently forbears to punish, till they have come to the fullness of their sins, so deals he with us, lest that, being come to the height of sin, afterwards he should take vengeance on us. And therefore he never withdraws his mercy from us. And though he punish with adversity, yet he never forsakes his people. But let this be spoken now for a warning unto us. And now we will come to the declaring of the matter in a few words. Now Eleazar, one of the principal scribes, an aged man, and of a well-favored countenance, was constrained to open his mouth and to eat swine's flesh. So they were making people eat pork in order to cause their temple of their body to be defiled. They were finding ways to pressure the people into eating pork or to putting pork inside their bodies. There may be some folks out there who are pressing a whole lot of the world to put pork inside their bodies, like inside their veins, like inside of needles that go inside your body, that put pork inside you. Interesting. But he, Eleazar, choosing rather to die gloriously, volunteering to die, Eleazar volunteers to die with certainty. Choosing rather to die gloriously than to live stained with such an abomination, spit it forth and came of his own accord to the torment, as it behooved them to come that are resolute to stand out against such things as are against the Torah, for love of life to be tasted. But they that had the charge of that wicked feast, for the old acquaintance they had with the man, took him aside and begged him to bring flesh of his own provision, such as was lawful for him to use, and make as if he did eat of the flesh taken from the sacrifice commanded by the king, that in doing so he might be delivered from death, and for the old friendship with them find favor. Basically, these guys took him aside and said, listen, you don't need to go get tortured because you're not going to eat pork. Why don't you just go ahead and get some beef, and we'll make everyone think it's pork, and then you'll escape the torture, and you'll find favor with all of these people here. So this would maybe be like someone saying, maybe you could find a way to act like you've already gotten injected with pork, but secretly we'll all know you didn't. But publicly everyone will know that you did. It's a dilemma many of us are facing. Let's see how he responds, shall we? But he, Eleazar, began to consider discreetly, and as became his age, and the excellency of his ancient years, and the honor of his gray head, whereon was come, and his most honest education from a child, or rather the holy Torah, made and given by Elohim. Therefore he answered accordingly, and willed them straightways to send him to Sheol. For it becomes not our age, said he, in any wise to dissemble, whereby many young persons might think that Eleazar, being 80 years old, and 90, were now gone to a strange religion, and so they, through my hypocrisy and desire to live a little longer, should be deceived by me, and I get a stain to my old age, and make it abominable. For though for the present time I should be delivered from the punishment of men, yet should I not escape the hand of El Shaddai, neither alive nor dead. Wherefore now, manfully changing this life, I will show myself such as one of my age requires, and leave a notable example to such as be young, to die willingly and courageously for the honorable and holy Torah. And when he said these words, immediately he went to the torment. They that led him changed their goodwill towards him from before into hatred, because he foresaid these speeches, and they thought from a desperate mind. But when he was ready to die with stripes, he groaned and said, it is manifest unto Yahuwah that has the holy knowledge, that whereas I might have been delivered from death, I now endure sore pains in body by being beaten, but in soul I am well content to suffer these things, because I fear him. And thus this man died, leaving his death for an example of a noble courage and a memorial of virtue, not only unto young men, but unto all his nation, This man chose to die. He chose to give up his life rather than to hold on to it at the end when it was required of him. This is somebody that is unique. This is somebody that is very, very rare. So rare, in fact, that he will get a very special seat within his Father's household for eternity. Such a seat that makes our mouths to speak of his story and to remember him forever. His name is written in the Lamb's book of life, and it will not be blotted out. You know why? Because he may have preserved the testimonies of Yahuwah for 90 years of his life, but none of that would have accounted for the example that it was if at the end, when he was tested, when the coils of the serpent were about his neck, that he did not surrender, that he did not give in and surrender everything that he had to just be reprieved of the suffering for a moment. But in that moment, he chose, now was my time to die. May I go to it with boldness. May I volunteer my life, because you know what's going to happen? The blood of this martyr is going to fertilize the earth. The enemy, you know what? The serpent, he got cursed in Genesis 3, right? What was his punishment? How did the serpent, the dragon, what was his punishment? Do you remember this? And Yahuwah Elohim said unto the serpent, because you have done this, you are cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon your belly shall you go, and dust shall you eat all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. It shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. The serpent, he was going to, from that day forward, crawl upon his belly and eat the dust of the earth. So why does the enemy want to bring man into sin, the transgression of the instructions of the Father? Sin is the transgression of the Father. That's 1 John. When we sin, when it's given its full fruit, the fruit of sin is going to always be death. And man, from dust we were taken, so to dust we return, which is literally the food of the dragon. The dragon's ultimate goal in this life, the reason he holds a covenant with death, is so that they can bring men back into the dust from whence they came from, so that they can consume them. Just the way men, we must sweat off our face into the earth that we have cursed. The earth was cursed because of us, because of our transgression. And so the food that we need to take from it comes from our sweat. When we sweat into the earth gives us back its bread. When we die, we go down and we become the dust, which the serpent can eat and consume in order for him to survive. But the enemy, his desire is to cause people to come into his kingdom of death so that he can feast upon them longer. Whereas Yahuwah is not willing that any of us should perish, but that all of us should come to the full knowledge, the full understanding, the full reverence, the full strength, the full power, might, wisdom, knowledge, and understanding of who he is, that we could be counseled in the deepest part of our being to walk in his ways and to be raised to life, that we would have life come back into our bodies, that the enemy would not consume us any longer. Eleazar, by him choosing to die rather than to escape death for a season, set a precedence that all the people of the earth could from that day forth forever look to and remember. His blood that he voluntarily gave up, like Yeshua on the cross, when he voluntarily gave up his life, his blood went into the earth and anointed the mercy seat on the throne of Yahuwah on this earth, and was a purer blood than Abel. And now it witnesses to all of the earth, to the heavens above and to the earth beneath and to the waters under the earth, that Yahuwah is the champion, that his son's blood cries out as a testimony so that we can be delivered, that we could be cleaned from this curse that was guaranteed to be against us, that would condemn us guaranteed unto death. Instead, he bore that in his body so that we could be raised to life, that whoever would call upon him in their day of trouble, they themselves would be delivered. That is the promise that is there for us if we would hold on to it. These people held on to the promises of Yahweh, and they were delivered to death. I got to spend a good amount of time not too long ago with a first responder. He was a fire chief. He was somebody who volunteered, like many first responders out there, he volunteered to go risk his life on a regular basis for decades at this point. He was not a young man when I met him. He was young in spirit, but he was not in his youth. This man was still volunteering to go die every single time he was on call, which, if you didn't know it, was all the time. Every single day, if his phone went off before it was a pager, at any given time, day or night, if he was remotely in the area, he was going, which meant he had to live with a perpetual mindset that at any given moment, it was my time to die. And he would go lay down his life for the sake of others. He was describing to me the decisions that he had to make, from dad at home trying to build a house for his family, to suddenly being called upon to go and try to draw a human being who has been mangled and is on the edge of dying out of a burning, horrifying nightmare. That he himself would volunteer to step into the flames, to charge into the place everybody else was running out of, and say, I will give up my life that you, even if you were an enemy, even if you were an active criminal who was in the act of doing crime, he himself would volunteer to go rescue, to go save that soul. And you know what? The scars that were in that mind, the torment, the anguish that had been locked up and tucked away and sequestered into little tiny compartments was there. I could see it on his face. I could see it in his bones and in his fingers and in his sweat of his brow. I could smell it in him, that there was a groaning in him, that there was an anguish in him, that there was a fury in him, because he had offered up his life time and time and time again. He was alive. He was alive, but you know what? Things happen when you volunteer to die and you come through the flames and you yet live. They're the survivors of death that bear the marks that can't be healed on this side of creation. And those marks scream out. And you know what happens though? Those people become witnesses. They become living stones of testimony to everyone around who would give them their ear, who would give them their eyes, who would weep with them, who would cry with them, who would give them the opportunity to share their story. And I had a small window of time to sit there and allow some of those deeper parts of his soul to speak, as others have done with me. And there is just this wave of understanding. There's this unspoken way of knowing each other when they get to express things that they don't get to talk to their family about, because then you just come back home to your children and you don't get to tell them what daddy just saw or what daddy just was a part of or anything else, and why the blood still caked under your knuckles. Like, he was volunteering to do good. But there was a time in my life where I volunteered to do evil. And I volunteered to be a participant in radical, intelligent evil against other people's lives. And I suffered from that scourge in my sleep. It would torment me and cause me great anguish. Even just a year ago, a year and a half ago, I was trying to get free from the nightmares, the consequences from participating in bringing death for the dragon was that he would steal your sleep later on. Even if you lived through the ordeal, he would steal your sleep later on. And I had to go through this journey of healing and of redemption, of deliverance, and a lot of which I share in my book, Snatched from the Flames. That is my journey of coming out of that world and into the wilderness where the Father called me to be and to go and live and to dwell. That was a book of journeying through those nightmares, of talking about those nightmares for the first time and finding deliverance. But I wasn't necessarily finding restoration. I was basically quiet for so many years of my life that when I finally popped the cork on that bottle, it exploded all over everything. And it was incessant anguish, so much so that I've been in continual pain always, ever since I made the choice to deal with those compartments of death that were in me, to deal with the bloodshed that was in me. But you know what happened when a year ago, the Father told me, no more other things, just listen to or read my word for a year. And it transformed me because I started to read these stories like this. I'd read a lot of these before, but it's different somehow suddenly when you've confronted the nightmares of your past. When you read of suffering that has taken place in the body. One of the books I used to recommend to people a lot was called Tortured for Christ, because I thought it was one of the best things ever for people to understand what volunteers of death go through, what it does, and what kind of fertilizer blood makes for the soil. Because if you're going to kill an animal, you had one requirement, like Leviticus talks about, that the blood should go back into the earth. Lots of places talk about it, but the blood needs to go into the earth, and you're not to eat blood. Don't eat blood. Don't eat blood. It says this over and over and over and over and over and over again. In certain passages, it'll say it 3 or 4 times in one chapter. Don't eat blood. Why does it say that? It says because the soul, the life, is in the blood. There's something that's in the blood that makes it life, that doesn't go away just because it goes out of your body. The life is still there. And the earth, it says it's supposed to go into the earth, that the earth gets that witness. The earth is supposed to have that, not our bodies. So if people come along and want to put poisons like blood in your body and put it into your blood, which is what many people are trying to do right now, to bring blood, unclean, impure blood, essences, pieces of life in you to corrupt you and turn you into an image of the dragon, you should resist unto death. You should volunteer to die rather than to sign up for the comforts and the convenience that the society is offering you in exchange. Here's another person who is going to volunteer to die along with all of her children. And it's one of the greatest witnesses of motherly love you will ever hear in your life. And if you're a mother out there right now, you were made to be strong. You were made to make decisions that only a mother can understand. You were made to make a choice to lay your life down as you have before, but to also give up your children. That you're to surrender your children should they choose to follow after their father's instructions, their loving instructions of their father, which might lead them to death. Many moms out there have had to see their son sign up and volunteer to die. I signed up to join the military. At the same time, it's a voluntary army, they would always remind us to us, but they paid us. They paid us. We had a wage. It was like 60 cents an hour or something like that. People figured it out while we were in basic training, how much we were getting paid, but we were still being paid. But it's different when somebody is genuinely a volunteer. When you just volunteer, when you have no financial restitution or reciprocity promised. Like, I haven't had a regular guaranteed paycheck job, salary kind of job for, 4.5 years, 5 years. I've predominantly operated as a volunteer, and it changes the way you practice and do things in your life. You do things differently. A volunteer first responder versus a guy who's paid for the job, one is called a hireling. If you're a shepherd out there, you would call that person a hireling. There's a lot of pastors and people who are in religious institutions who are hirelings. They're paid to be a shepherd. But the shepherd that volunteers to be a shepherd, that doesn't get paid, doesn't get connected to that system as, if you want to be here, you got to say these things and do these things if you want to get paid. It's different than someone who's a volunteer shepherd. It always changes things. David, there's characters throughout the Bible that talk about shepherding, and they talk about a hireling. And the difference is when a hireling is present and death, imminent death, comes their way, a hireling often flees in the face of death. A hireling often gives way to the temptation that's in all of us to avoid the sufferings that come when death comes knocking at our door. But a person who has given themselves over, who has surrendered themselves, steps forward to face death, to contend against death, to fight against the dragon of destruction with everything in them. And there is a beautiful thing that happens in there because the Father is all about life. The kingdom of darkness may all be about death, but Yahweh is all about life. And he rewards those who seek life and surrender themselves or their children to suffer and die for his ways. This is a mother who gives up her life and gives up the life of her children so that they themselves would not profane the name of Yahweh and not transgress his instructions and not defile the temples of their bodies. This is a mighty Gibborim. So sign up for this class, y'all, and take witness of her ways. Chapter 7. And it came to pass also that 7 brethren with their mother were taken and compelled by the king against the Torah to taste swine's flesh, and were tormented with scourges and whips. But one of them that spoke first said thus, "What would you ask or learn of us? We are ready to die, rather than to transgress the Torah of our fathers." Then the king, being in a rage, commanded pans and cauldrons to be made hot, which, being heated, he commanded to cut out the tongue of him that spoke first, and to cut off the extremities of his bodies, the rest of his brothers and his mothers looking on. Now when he was thus maimed in all of his body, he commanded him, being yet still alive, to be brought to the fire and to be fried in the pan. And as the vapor of the pan was for a good space dispersed, they exhorted one another with the mother to die courageously, saying this, "Yahuwah Elohim looks upon us, and in truth has comfort in us, as Moshe in his song, which witnessed to their faces, declared, saying, and he shall be comforted in his servants." They challenged each other with the words of their father and their father's father before them to be courageous. And you know who they remembered? The song of Moshe. Do you know what we're going to sing with our conquering Messiah when he comes back to fight against those who have fought with his kingdom? When he comes back as the Messiah, right? The 5th gospel, you guys, you may not have known it. There's another gospel that's in the scriptures that was written by and that was spoken by the very mouth of the Messiah. It's the revelation of Yeshua, the Mashiach. Because when he came in the first 4 gospels, the accounts that we have there, he was covert. He was not openly the Messiah that everybody was looking for, the conquering king. He didn't come like that. He came camouflaged. He came hidden, concealed in such a way so that the enemy could not have known what his plans were. Because it says that if the dragon had known that the crucifixion of Yeshua would have brought about the sanctification of mankind, Yeshua died. He gave up his life. He died and he rose again so that he could marry us, bring us back to our Father in heaven. He gave up his life and he turned around the book of Revelation, which was one of the first books of the scripture that they tried to rip out and throw out and have time and time again, was our Messiah's words to us when he was revealed. Apocalypse, Revelation, the peeling back of the curtain, the taking off of that camouflage and revealing to everyone his eyes full of fire, the burning indignation and the wrath. Because you know what he kept doing, Yeshua does in the book of Revelation? He examines the works of his churches, of his called out assembly. He looks at their works. He tests to see your fruit. He inspects the fruit of his people. Every single one of you are going to have your works inspected. I am a vine dresser. That is what I do. I'm a master vine dresser. Every day of the week, I sit there 5 days a week, predominantly, sometimes 6. 5 days a week, 50 hours a week doing this, so that the fruit of my labor can be brought forth in abundance, whether it's tomatoes, which is predominantly what I do, or it's other beautiful fruits. I'm basically mostly a tomato kind of guy, though. It tends to just be where I go, or it's shepherding. But this is always something that I have now been entrusted with to show the fruits of my labor. So when someone, my master, whatever farm I might be at that given time, when they walk into the greenhouse, when they walk into the field and they see the fruit hanging on the vine, they can inspect my works. Every one of them is laid bare. I love being a vine dresser because there's a lot of tasks that you can do on a farm. There's a lot of jobs I've done on farms that don't really show your work. Maybe not for days, sometimes weeks. There's people who, they call them seeders. They sit there all day and they seed these little seeding planting trays. They seed these things. tiny little seeds, sometimes bigger seeds, but tiny little seeds. And they sit there all day, and they have to be very, very careful to put each seed at a specific depth in a specific kind of softish, somewhat compacted, loomy soil. And they have to put it down just right and cover it up just right and label it very carefully. I can't stand that job. I'm not great at it. Chelsea and I would have tiny competitions between my tray and her tray to see who did better. Chelsea had like a 90 to 93% success germination, meaning plants came out of the seed. It's called germination. Mine tended to be like 70%. I'm just not really good at that job. So the fruit of my labor was revealed. But for sometimes days and weeks, the fruit of that labor isn't revealed. But when I dress a vine, you can immediately see the fruit of my labor. Every single vine that I touch, you can see every place I've touched it, whether with these or with my hands. And the fruit of that is borne out. It literally just hangs there on the vine. I generally don't show a lot of this, you guys, because some of what I do is kind of a trade secret. As in, it allows the farms that I work on to have an edge against their competitors. So I don't share a lot of it out of respect for them and as a way of that I can give them honor and bless the work of their land. So I don't share a lot of that inside scoop of it. But the methodology that I use is a system that allows the best possible produce and yield to come to a farmer for the tomato vine that they could have in an organic method. It's an incredibly laborious method, but by giving more of my time and more of my attention and more of my intentionality, the best fruit is yielded forth. And that's what Yeshua is wanting from his people. He wants to look at our works and see good fruit on the vine. And if not, do you know what he does? He says his father, Yahweh, is the vine dresser, and he will prune off every branch that bears not good fruit, and it will literally be thrown out. We cut branches off of these things, and we throw them out on the ground, and no joke, y'all, we trample them underfoot. We lay them out under trees so that the trees can bear forth fruit. Other trees that are bearing forth fruit, they get the dead stuff from the stuff that sucks and isn't getting the good fruit. We cut those things down and we throw them on the ground, and then we drive over them with the lawnmower and scatter them abroad, and then we trample those suckers underfoot. That's literally how it works, so that the trees that are bearing fruit can bear more fruit, because it's the way it works. To those that are entrusted with little and they do much with it, more, they get more. And that's the way the Father works. When he looks at all of our works and he sees the good fruit hanging there, he's going to give you more. It's all he does. He loves to do it. He delights to do it. And the revelation of Yeshua is right here in the mouth of this son who is literally being burned alive in a frying pan in front of his mother and his 6 other brothers. And his youngest brother is going to be the last in line. And let's see how they handle it. What I was getting at there was at the very end, when Yeshua comes back, we are going to sing the song of Moshe and the Lamb together. We will sing the songs together when he returns in his triumphant re-entry, where every eye will see him, like lightning splitting open the sky. Everyone, man, woman, and child, will see him, and no one will be able to hide from his face. He hid himself before. The next time he comes, he will be inescapable. There will be nowhere you can run. There will be nowhere you can hide. Not even death himself can hide from him. So at the last moment, we will sing the song of Moshe. And this should be the words on our mouth if we're going to volunteer to die. The song of Moshe. So when the first son was dead, after this number, they brought the second to make him a mockery. And when they pulled off the skin of his head with the hair, they asked him, "Will you eat the swine before you are punished through every member of your body?" But he answered in his own language, Hebrew, learned the language, and said, "No." Wherefore he also received the next torment in order, as the former did. And when he was at the last gasp, he said, "You like a fury, take us out of this present life. But the King of the world shall raise us up, who have died for his Torah, unto everlasting life." And after him was the third made a mocking stock. And when he was called forth, he put out his tongue, and that soon, holding forth his hands courageously, he said, "These I've had from heaven, and for his Torah I despise them, and from him I hope to receive them again. Insomuch the king and all who were with him marveled at the young man's courage, for he did not regard his own pains. A young man, you guys, is a young teenager. This is like a 12-year-old. Do you understand how courageous this is? This is a 5th grader. This is a 6th grader standing up and offering the tongue of his mouth to be cut out and his hands to be cut off rather than to forsake the commands of his Father in heaven. For words, he would rather die and have his body tortured and anguish for words, so that he wouldn't eat one piece of pork in his life, that he would not allow one pagan idolatrous act to be taken place, that he would not do one pagan festival and not transgress his father's instructions one time. He will die horribly. He will die horrifically. He will suffer in unimaginable ways for not losing this. But he would not forsake this. This is a courageous young man. And you know what? This is the 3rd son. Every son that you are going to read about is younger and younger and younger. They're children. These are children teaching old men how to live. This is the fruit of Eleazar's works. This is the young men that were inspired to be courageous because an old man gave up his life and didn't become a coward at the end. This is the fruit of Eleazar's blood, crying out as a testimony. Afterward, now when this boy was dead, they tormented and mangled the 4th in like manner. And when he was ready to die, he said, "It is good, being put to death by men, to look for hope from Elohim, to be raised up again by him. Now as for you, you shall have no resurrection to life." Afterward, they brought the 5th also and mangled him. And then he looked unto the king and said, "You have power over men. You are corruptible. You do what you will. Yet think not that our nation is forsaken of Elohim, but abide a while, and behold his great power, how he will torment you and your seed." Now after him they brought the 6th, who was ready to die, and he said, "Be not deceived without, for we suffer these things for ourselves, having sinned against our Elohim. Therefore, marvelous things are done unto us. But think not that taken in hand to strive against Elohim, that you shall escape unpunished." But the mother was marvelous above all, and worthy of honorable memory. For when she saw her 7 sons slain within the space of one day, she bore it with good courage, because of the hope that she had in Yahuwah. And she exhorted every one of them in her own language, filled with courageous spirit, and stirring up her womanish thoughts with a manly stomach. She said unto them, "I cannot tell you how you came into my womb, for I neither gave you breath nor life, neither was it I that formed the members of every one of you. But doubtless the Creator of the world, who formed the generation of man and found out the beginning of all things, will also of his own mercy give you the breath and life again, as ye now regard not your own selves for his Torah's sake, Now, Antiochus, this is a mother who is bearing forth her curse righteously, courageously. Women, this is how you fight against the curse of the dragon. Genesis 3. And unto the woman he said, I will multiply greatly your sorrow and your conception. In sorrow you shall bring forth children, and your desire shall be to your man, and he shall rule over you. There is nothing on this earth a man can do to understand the suffering and the anguish of bringing forth life in our loins. We cannot bear forth a child onto this earth. We can't multiply life in our bodies, but you can, and you suffer because of this in ways we will never understand. But in your suffering, he will bless you. In your offering of your body, when you surrender your vanity and give your body away, it says women are sanctified by child rearing. When you bring forth a child out of your body, and then you continue to give up your body for your child and for your husband, you will reap good fruit. You will reap the fruit of righteousness in your life. The joy of Yahweh will be your strength. He will clothe you with gladness. His delight is in you, and he will nourish you and sustain you in ways that he alone can do. This mother, when her children's lives were asked of her, cheered them on to die. Cheered them on, said, go volunteer to die. And now Antiochus, thinking himself despised and suspecting it to be a reproachful speech, while the youngest was yet alive, did not only exhort him by words, but also assured him with oaths that he would make him rich and a happy man if he would turn from the Torah of his fathers, and that also he would take him for his friend and trust him with affairs. But when the young man would in no case hearken unto him, the king called his mother and exhorted her that she should counsel the young man to save his life. And when he had exhorted her with many words, she promised him that she would counsel her son. But she, bowing herself toward him, laughing the cruel tyrant to scorn, spoke in her country's language, Hebrew, this manner: O my son, have pity upon me that bore you 9 months in my womb, and gave you such 3 years, and nourished you, and brought you up unto this age, and endured the troubles of education. I beseech you, my son, look upon the heavens and the earth and all that is therein, and consider that Elohim made them of things that were not, and so was mankind made likewise. Fear not, Altira, this tormentor, but being worthy of your brethren, take your death, that I may receive you again in mercy with your brethren. And while she was yet speaking these words, the young man said, Whom wait you for? I will not obey the king's commandment, but I will obey the commandment of the Torah that was given unto our fathers by Moshe. And you that have been the author of all mischief against the Ivrit shall not escape the hands of Elohim. For we suffer because of our sins. And though the living Yahweh be angry with us a little while for our chastening and correction, yet shall he be at one again with his servants. But you, O godless man, and of all other most wicked, be not lifted up without a cause, nor puffed up with uncertain hopes, lifting up your hand against the servants of Elohim. For you have not yet escaped the judgment of El Shaddai, who sees all things. For our brethren, who now have suffered a short pain, are dead under Elohim's covenant of everlasting life. But you, through the judgment of Elohim, shall receive just punishment for your pride. But I, as my brethren, offer up my body and life for the Torah of our fathers, beseeching Elohim that he would speedily be merciful unto our nation, and that you by torments and plagues may confess that he alone is Elohim, and that in me and my brethren the wrath of El Shaddai, which is justly brought upon our nation, may cease. Then the king, being in a rage, handed him worse than all the rest, and took it grievously that he was mocked. So this man died undefiled and put his whole trust in Yahweh. Last of all, after the sons, the mother died. Let this be enough now to have spoken concerning the idolatrous feasts and extreme tortures. This is the blood of the martyrs. This is what cries out to Yahweh day and night. I ask that the Father would listen to the cries of the blood that have been poured out across the earth for the people who regarded his covenant as precious. I've seen the blood spilled for things that were not precious, and I've never seen courage like this with my eyes until I've looked in the face of people who have suffered the marks of this, who carry in their flesh the scourge of wicked men's whips. My body is a witness of suffering. My eyes have seen it, but I don't want to speak of it again. I don't want to look at it anymore. I want to see the deliverance of our nation. I want to see the release of his people. I want to see the captives set free. And I wail and I cry for him and ask him, have mercy on us. Deliver us. Cry out to him and call upon him while there is still time. And he will ransom you. He will rescue you. Because there is one who volunteered to die. He gave up his life. No man could take it from him. The serpent could not take the life of Yeshua. Yeshua gave it up freely. We must follow our Messiah. We must volunteer to die. And that is what we're here for. And if we die to the conveniences of this world, to the creature comforts of this society, he will raise us up to life. In the wilderness where the Father led me, he has satisfied me. He has watered me, fed me, clothed me, guarded me, protected me, so that I did not have to witness death any longer. When my wife and I made that choice, when we left neighborhoods, jobs, houses, families, incomes, guaranteed provisions, when we left the comforts of our household and we went on the road and into the wilderness, we suffered a different kind of challenges. But you know what I didn't suffer from? The scourge of the civilization that had corrupted me. The Father blessed us, and I know he will bless every one of you who boldly step out and sacrifice your lives. Give up the way you used to do things. Lose your comforts now while it's easy, and learn the way of Yahweh. Learn how to walk in his ways. Learn how to be a strange, peculiar people, so that we can then be marked by our Creator at the end, so that when he looks upon us to sift the wheat from the tares, when he sorts out and sifts the nations with vanity, when he looks at our fruits, he will see the mark of Yahweh is upon us. I pray that that would come alive for you, and that the blood of his covenant would be upon you for deliverance, for joy, and for hope. I love you all. I pray you live dangerously every single day of your life, because the days are evil, but you were born for such a time as this. I'll talk to you soon.